Morning guys, it's Tony Paladin, and today I'd like to chat a little bit about managing the young athlete. The young athletes, sort of anything between 8 and 18, so it's that adolescent phase where the young athlete is still largely in the care of their parents. A lot of them have got school, and there's a team around them of stakeholders in the young athlete's development that sometimes roles tend to overlap a little. Not everyone knows what is going on and what another person is or isn't doing. And what ends up happening a lot of the time is that there can be a lot of confusion and frustration in the young athlete's life. So I put together a very basic, simple model that I'm going to be expanding on and more than likely doing a workshop on. And ultimately, I think this will expand its way into publication. But initially, just putting my basic ideas forward, I've identified a very, very simple structure that, if applied in the management of the young athlete, it tends to resolve a lot of unwanted complication. So the first thing I'd like to say is that when you are developing an athlete, so when there's been a young person and they've shown promise in a sport, basically it's a small investment that ultimately could become a very big investment. Now, where the yield of the big investment lies is an Olympic gold medal. It could be a professional sport, but ultimately it has to start somewhere with the small investment. So I think using the mindset that the young athlete could be thought of as an investment means that we always want to be adding towards our investment and not taking away from it. I also think, just in terms of the investment mindset, there's a lot of time and money that goes into the development of the young athlete. And ultimately, or initially, a lot of the money is going to come from parents and from the support structure. And we would want that those funds and all the time and nurture that gets spent to be well rewarded, and for it not to be wasted and throwing good money after bad. So in terms of starting with my basic athletic model of the young athlete, I think the easiest way to do it is to identify 3 key areas that need to be nurtured. And in terms of how they fit together, it's quite important that discussion happens with the various stakeholders in the athlete's life as to whose roles and responsibilities are responsible for each task. So first and foremost, I think that the most important part of the young athlete's development is the psychological profile. So in terms of what we're going to speak about today, there's going to be the psychological profile, there's going to be the strength and conditioning, in that's going to fall nutrition, management, injuries, and then thirdly, there's going to be the actual development of the technical components of the sport. So as we refer to these different models, we'll assign certain tasks to certain people, and most importantly, the key element that ties these 3 together is the liaison or the project manager in the middle of this investment that makes sure that all of the areas are talking to one another and that everything is met accordingly. So starting with the psychological profile, the psychological component, that's basically the most important. If your young athlete is not happy and not motivated to train, and they don't have a stable environment around them, there's no point in going any further. There has to be motivation. Getting up and training in the morning and putting in the hours and the physical slog is difficult. It breaks you down mentally. And unless you are extremely goal-orientated and have a very, very good idea about where the prize is, it's going to be very, very difficult to stay psychologically motivated. Now, in terms of the roles and the responsibilities of the stakeholders in the psychological component, I think would primarily be family, i.e. parents, siblings, and then close friends. I think, yes, of course there are other many psychological stakeholders, but ultimately at the end of the day, I think the coaching and the strength conditioning needs to remain where it is, but the psychological component of this young athletic profile needs to be well nurtured. So just in terms of the primary role, I think parents take heed that you are very, very responsible in the young athlete's life with regards to the psychology. We'll touch a little bit later about how much involvement there should or maybe shouldn't be in the other elements. But for now, I think parents, your role, keep that athlete happy, motivated, make sure your home life is stable, and make sure your athlete's being heard. Yes, they are still your child at the end of the day. Comfort them, be a parent, be a confidant, and just make sure that you're looking for any red flags that may indicate any form of stress that the young athlete may be going through. Quite simply, moving on to the second model is the strength and conditioning. Now, maybe strength and conditioning is not the right word. Maybe it's more the physical profile of the athlete. It's not technically, or doesn't have anything to do with the technical elements of the sport. It's how strong are we, how fit are we, how rested. It's the profile of, are you an optimal athletic specimen, for lack of a better description. So generally, there's a strength conditioning coach that would be the primary stakeholder in this area, and they would have a very, very close relationship with the physical therapist, with the nutritionist or dietitian, with putting together all of the key elements of that athlete's physical development and making sure that the parameters of the sport are valid. So obviously, every sport is different, from ballet to weightlifting. The profiles and the needs of the athletic profile are different. Certain sports will require more power, others will require more flexibility, others will require a blend of both. You'll get, again, extreme example, a marathon runner versus a sprinter. The physical outputs and requirements are quite different, and that's why it's super important that the strength and conditioning component is very, very well supervised, but kept relatively clean from the others. I'll expand a little bit more later into the crossover from the psychology to the strength and conditioning. The third component is very much the technical element. This is the technical aspect of the sport. It's form, basically. It's making sure that you are as mechanically efficient as you possibly can be within the sport. And often the primary stakeholder here would be the technical coach or the finishing coach. Now, picking up on these three areas, having painted a brief scenario on how this all fits together, one can quite easily see how if one person that is responsible for one area of the athletic profile blurs the lines, perhaps, between the other two, very, very easily can it develop where there's a crossover of communication, or either too much of one task is done and another is neglected. And I see this quite a lot with a breakdown in communication between the strength conditioning coach and the technical coach, between the strength conditioning coach and the physical therapist or the chiropractor or the medical team that manages injuries, a breakdown in nutrition, and that thing will link its way back to the psychological profile of the primary caregiving being the parental side of it. I also see a breakdown in the model where parents seem to get a little bit over involved in the strength conditioning component or the technical component. Now, obviously, yes, if the parent is the person managing all of those portfolios, then that's their role. And also bearing in mind that their roles aren't exclusive or mutually exclusive. You can have certain stakeholders or role players being responsible for one, two, perhaps three of the different areas. But again, as long as it's spoken about and structured in such a way that there's good understanding, that the flow of information is good, then I think we are on a good path to mitigating potential breakdown of the model. So, just in terms of liaising or putting everything together, you ultimately want to have a project manager. Now, the project manager needs to be, or it is advisable, that they are as objective as possible. They need to look at everything quite from a global perspective. One can see if the person who's very much involved in the psychological realm, the parents, the friends, are wanting to be the project manager my fear is that sometimes bias could occur. So sometimes it's maybe better for the parents to nominate a project manager with whom they work closely, who can act as an arbitrator or a mediator between parties, so that the parents can fulfill their primary role in the psychological component, but yet still understand that there will be times where that athlete is sad and hungry and tired, because training is hard and it's not easy, and losing competitions is also not nice. And there are going to need to be times when you'll need to comfort your young athlete, and other times where you need to just help them to work over the obstacle and allow them to treat a disappointment as a milestone in order for them to achieve the next goal. So generally my suggestion is that either one of the three primary stakeholders, i.e. the parental setup, the strength conditioning setup, or the technical setup, is someone in there generally will tend to be the arbitrator or mediator that ties everything together. But as long as there is a structure put in place that all the information is optimally funneled through that project manager, then you're going to again create a model that is, I don't quite want to say hierarchical in structure, but the information flow generally tends to be funneled into what's an optimal model that has been pre-discussed. So generally, the first advice I give to when you've identified the talents in a young athlete is to nominate your team, put your team together, nominate your mediator, your arbitrator, and actually sit and discuss and have a meeting. It's project planning, very simple. It's investment planning. Who is responsible for what? Who has the ultimate say? How does everything get put together? And decide as a team into what your ideal outcome is going to be like. If everyone is on the same page, which, assuming that athletic performance over a long term is going to be the common theme, it's more than likely, will more than likely agree, and the team will more than likely agree on the model that needs to get rolled out. And once that's been documented, then it's relatively easy to roll it out. And at the end of the day, not everyone's going to be happy all the time, but if we can be performance driven and focus on a gold medal lifestyle, and if everybody in the athletic framework is doing their job optimally, then I think we might find that you create an athlete that progressively and sustainably gets better and better with the years, and then move from a promising young athlete into a well-performing, slightly older athlete. Anyway, thanks for listening to my brief discussion on this. This is a very rough sketch in my head still, so I'm going to formalize my model and then start rolling it out with a little bit more fine-tuning.